Sup everybody, this is Karak with ACG and welcome to another episode of Walking the Walk. Today we're going to cover some technical elements, and I've done this occasionally in past Walking the Walks. Today I'm going to cover motion scan, which is the motion facial scanning that was used for LA Noire. The reason why I bring this up is because LA Noire recently had a remaster, 4K on the Xbox X, checkerboarded on the PS4 I believe, and we saw these improvements to various different elements within LA Noire, but not others, and a lot of people have asked me, what was going on with that facial scanning system and technology back in the day compared to now, and why didn't we see it grow or sort of come into the future like everything else? So what I'll do is I'll discover a little of the historical, a little of the technical, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty. The first thing is, historically, you really have to look at this, the creation of these teams to create LA Noire. There was a team that was also created, and a company technically that was a sister company to Team Bondi that was created for this technology in particular. Now, motion scan is a little different, especially back in the day, what you could get from mocapping normally to this kind of motion scanning. Normally mocapping, and this is something you see videos of, whether it be movies or TV, you see some dots on people's faces and them running around, right? Blue screen or green screen. Green screen has really been replaced by blue screen because of some color correction that can be done. But normally what you see is those dots, and those dots are reflective markers. Now, the reason why you don't see 8 million dots, though you do in some games, and those sometimes have increased resolution and fidelity on the facial expressions themselves, is because each point is a bit of data, and you have to decide how much data you want. Well, motion scanning was a little different, and in fact actually sort of went into that and just said, screw it, we're not going to worry about how much data. How did they do it? Well, they got 32 cameras in 2 camera pairings stereo, so 16 per side, and every single second they got 30 frames of data per camera. And then they collated all that data, and what they did was they created, basically you could call it a facial map that they could then put over the face of the character, and what you got was an incredibly high fidelity, super high detail at that time, facial reconstruction of everything that an actor did when they were acting. Now, one of the reasons why this was done was because LA Noire was always going to be this kind of game where there was going to be somebody looking at somebody else, trying to identify what emotions they had. When you look back at the technology that was available at that time and the mocapping that was available, people just didn't think we could get the fidelity that was really needed, the detail that was really needed for a player to really feel confident. You know, it's not just that it looks good, it's that you can accurately and on a high average guess what somebody is thinking in that game. Now, we all know what I'm talking about. There's times in that game where we do see something and we're like, definitely guilty. And the game's like, rah, rah. No, he wasn't guilty. And you're like, what the hell? I'll get to that in a second, because it does happen in all games where you're going to have those issues. But that wasn't really a reflection of the technology. So again, 16 cameras in stereo pairings, taking data every single frame, which was one of the reasons why this was at 30 frames per second, because that is a shit ton of data. Now, to do this, what they had to do is they had to have the actors not move at all, which was actually a problem. There's 2 reasons. One, normal mocapping can allow you to do both your facial scanning as well as your body. So you can run around, they can also get the face at the same time. This wasn't possible with motion scan. What motion scan did is it had a person sitting in front of very bright, even lights. It bathed them in those lights, and they had to give their lines, and there was very little movement side to side that they could do. You actually can tell sometimes when a person almost feels like you can almost see one of the actors try to do more than they're really supposed to. Now, even though there was an even light and all these cameras were taking this information, all these cameras were also taking the information on a horizontal plane. Otherwise, you'd have a million cameras because you'd have ones just a little higher, ones just a little lower. You can't do that. So they weren't allowed to move a ton. And even thespians like, let's say, John Noble and so forth, you know, somebody who's more of a, you know, he's definitely been known to do all kinds of different starring roles, different roles and stuff like that. You can even see him occasionally where it looks like there's a little desire to get out of the frame, and they're not allowed to do it. But motion scanning, one thing it did do was it added such a high fidelity and such just an increasing amount of detail on people's faces that you were able to discern what they were thinking. Here's the problem. And it's a problem that the only way I can describe it, actually, first I'll talk a little bit about the technicalities of it all, and then I'll talk about the emotions. First, the technicalities. Original mocapping, creating a skeleton and skinning that skeleton is different than creating a skin map from someone's face. The data isn't beneath it. So it's a little bit like looking at a mountain, no smoke's coming out. No volcano there. We know that's a bad idea, right? So what happened with these is we got all of this data, and then you have to apply it to a skeleton. And one of the problems that you see in LA Noire when you're playing it is there's a little bit of a difference between the amount of fidelity, the amount of detail, the amount of flexibility that a person has in their face versus their bodies. This is something that was brought up even when the game first came out, where people were like, the animations look a little stilted. It wasn't necessarily that they were super stilted, when you compare them to anything else at that time, but they certainly were when it comes to the faces and the amount of extra detail you got. Now, when it comes, that's a little bit about the technical, but when it comes to why sometimes we make mistakes in this game, think about it this way. The best example I could probably give is Heat, where you have two characters who deal with their emotions in dramatically different ways, and yet at the same time are just two extremes, and there's thousands of variables in between. The first would be, of course, Robert De Niro. In one of the first scenes of that movie, he's in a diner and he's talking with his gang after something has gone wrong. And if you watch him, there's a contained element of menace that he has. He's mad, he's frustrated, but it is a completely different type of anger than we normally see from people. It's a pursed lips. You can even see him occasionally moving his lips like he wants to say something, but that's just not his character. He says a couple lines, he waits, and there's a menace there, and it's a very solid but silent menace that you can get from that character. That is on a whole different extreme when you look at Al Pacino. And Al Pacino's character, who is over the top in his anger, in his sexual desire for his wife, in his happiness, in even his caring for his kid. Every single thing about him is more expressive and more open. Here's the problem. That's the way humans normally work. When you record them and then you have somebody else try to guess, the problem is that you get a group of developers, and I've talked about this in past videos, where people get accustomed to something and they don't really reach out and grab somebody new. Well, what happens here is you have these characters being created, their writing, their lines, all of this kind of stuff is going on, and all the same people are seeing this data, and not necessarily new people who might have been able to point and go, you know what? You think this character looks frustrated. To me, he looks sly, right? And one means he's frustrated at maybe the cops interrogating him. The other means he's sly and we think he's getting away with something. Completely different choices that you would have when you played LA Noire, correct? So that kind of stuff definitely happened. You get a more discreet look. You get more detail, but two distinct weaknesses pop up. One being the animation of the lower bodies that we talked about, where you sort of see an uncanny valley where one thing looks amazing and the other looks just a bit off because this one thing looks so amazing. And then you also see the fact that there are just so many different variables of detail. Now, why doesn't this pop up as much in normal kind of animation? One of the things is that you can get the overacting of, let's say, a Pacino. You can get the bigger smile that you need when you're able to go in there and adjust manually different things and really adjust those models and those details. But with the amount of data that they had, it's almost too discrete. There was almost too much data, and it becomes difficult for the player. Where, let's say, you get something that looks like, I mean, to be brutally honest, a smiley face, a yellow, button smiley face, where it's got a smile, it's easy to go, okay, just happy, right? But when you're playing LA Noire and you look at somebody and they're moving and their face and they're twitching and, their lips are doing weird stuff and their eyebrows are doing weird stuff, you can easily get confused on what exactly is occurring there. That's probably one of the biggest issues that this system had back then. Now, why have we not seen it sort of move forward into new technology or into new games? Well, it's actually went bankrupt. It didn't make them any money, and they ended up going out of business, and that was bought by George Miller. A lot of the stuff was bought by George Miller of Mad Max director fame. Nothing's really been done of it. But when it comes to motion scan, one of the biggest reasons also was its size. I sort of alluded to this earlier. The amount of data that you are collecting, think about it this way. If I create a skeleton and I skin that skeleton, and the only thing I need to tell the system is that I've moved the jawbone a little bit, and the system just draws the skin to where it's supposed to be, there isn't discrete details or discrete information hidden in each one. It's just like, here's some data, here's some data, here's some data. This is what's occurring here. But with motion scan, it was a package of flesh. It was a face package. And it was huge. And so you had a massive game. I think it shipped on the Xbox 360 on 3 discs, and a great deal of that was unfortunately texture detail. Now, why do we not see this in the, sort of coming about? And why did we not see many improvements when it comes to the remaster? One of the reasons why is because it's unwieldy tech now. I mean, it is an older tech now. So you can, when you remaster, you can up-res and you can do a lot of those things and you can play around with hardware. But to really go in and adjust lighting per scene and stuff like that is quite difficult. Additionally, that was another problem with motion scan. Another issue there were some problems with applying real lighting and real-time lighting, or even a really good fake baked lighting. And because that game actually had somewhat of a true, 24-hour time span kind of thing, it was even more difficult for them. In fact, it's one of the complaints you'll get about LA Noire sometimes, is that people will say the characters look amazing, but their lighting looks off. Now, we see that even in current games. That's something that can happen with the lighting engine if it's not real time, if it's not really refracting off everything, if it's not really coloring the person's face. We can see that even now, but we certainly saw it then. And then it was more of a technical problem where they couldn't, once that data was sort of there, it was very, very, very difficult for them to figure out a way to adjust it in real time. And that's the problem, guys. You do have to adjust it in real time. You can't just say, okay, we're going to adjust it. You have to adjust it for all the lightings, somebody's flashlight hitting your face, all of those kind of different things. And it's very difficult to really do it accurately. So there's a lot of fakery and bakery that went on in there. And but it never really looked perfect. And when it comes to motion scan, I like to think of motion scan a little bit like, I guess, voxels, where we see a technology come up at the same time. Voxels is something that even now there's a couple games that use it. Amok on the Saturn used it. Cube World currently uses it. There's a couple games that use voxels. It's another way of creating your world. And in a way, I like to think of motion scan sort of like this, where it came up and some of its strengths have been taken by normal mocap. Some of its ideas have been taken, but the actual technology is just flatly too unwieldy. Now, what we get now that we didn't have way back then was camera rigs where the cameras were right on people's faces and you could see that blue light. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but you can look at the behind the scenes. That stuff has happened just in the last, 5 years to 6 years. And the game was, remember, being built 2 to 3 years prior to its release. So you have to add another 2 or 3 years onto that and look at the technology it was going against at the time. Motion scan is, to me, one of the most interesting old technologies that I would love to see somebody sort of tackle again in a way with the new technology and the new way in which we can handle cameras and the new way in which we can handle recording, that I would like to see done to get that fidelity. We see it rarely in games. Tomb Raider, I think Rise of the Tomb Raider did a really good job with its facials and just how it was all mocap together. But if you look at some of the behind the scenes, it's not just a couple dots like it is in some games. It's tons. It looks like somebody sprayed ink on somebody's face. Uncharted does a good job, but even one of the things you'll even hear about that team, and they'll state, is that, they rely heavily on their animators to touch things up. And the idea of really getting somebody's face and getting the little quirks and getting the little movements, that's what I would love to see us move into in the future. We've got some amazing, just really stellar animation that goes on right now. Uncharted 4, I've talked about this before. Emily Rose, I think is her name, the actress from Haven. She's the wife of Nathan in that. I thought she did an incredible job. There's a lot of good emotion on the person's face. All of that kind of stuff is well done, but it's all different types of technology than really what motion scan was. Will we ever see anything exactly like it in the future? No, but I do hope that as technology continues and, miniaturization continues, and we have that ability to go smaller with cameras, and we have that ability to make rigs more comfortable for actors, we can get more and more and more data until, now when we look at Gollum, for example, in Lord of the Rings, and you're like, yeah, it looks pretty good, but you can sort of see some of those little idiosyncrasies there in the technology. I can't wait until we go back and look and go, you know what? It's just, that looks real to me. And we're starting to see it already, unless we talk about Superman's mustache being removed. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. A little bit about motion scan, a little bit about the technology there. And it's just a really interesting, I think it's a really interesting time to go back and look. You have this older game that's being remastered, but one element didn't really get the remaster. And that really can make you dive into why. Why did we not see such improvement? We saw an improvement. It was cleaned up a bit, but there were some definite issues that we saw even in the new one. And it's always interesting to talk about those things. So at the end of this, I do want to say one big thank you to all the patrons and all the people who use the Amazon affiliate links. If you've seen me on Twitter, I've talked about this. Amazon affiliate links, surprisingly enough, when somebody uses those help out more than I could possibly have ever imagined. It's been almost stunning to see how much those help. Patron helped a ton. I really do appreciate everybody who's a patron, everybody who jumps into Discord, does the B movie night, and just helps the channel be what it's supposed to be and what I want to see it go to in the future. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you liked the video. If you did, thumbs up. If you didn't, thumbs down. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.